So, of course, the one time I decide to do this voiceover thing, I get a cold. So, bear with me guys for a little while. Please refrain from taking any bets on how long I can go without making some sort of penis metaphor. It's hard, but I can go pretty long. Alrighty, so this is the tutorial on how to make the Orion Class wand. This one I'm going to show you today actually went out to my good friend Roman. In a future video, I'll show you guys how to do the detailing on the other 4 classes of wands, which will be available soon at Simian and Moon. Let's get started. To embark on this adventure, you will need cardstock. Mine here is black, it doesn't really matter. I just happen to have this on hand. Might be handy for you to tell the difference between the card and the other materials later on, though. You may want to use regular paper, but I prefer card just for structural integrity. Elmer's or some other kind of glue. Best to have something that dries a little bit slowly, sets hard, and can still be moved around if you make a mistake. So, you know, PVA would be the best bet. Clay, of course. I haven't tried any of the oven-baked stuff, and it might be dangerous since card isn't exactly fireproof. But here I am using Das because it's fucking fantastic. I've tried Crayola and this other cheaper stuff, and I found them crumbling and not forming well and drying too soon and breaking down too much when they're too wet, shrinking and cracking. Yeah, no, it's a mess. Das does none of that. Some form of filler material, like sand, gold spray paint, preferably the more orangey coppery shade because it looks better on the finished product, black acrylic, a paintbrush, scissors, and a ruler. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is spread some glue on one side and roll up this cardstock in a sort of cone shape. This part determines the overall dimensions of the wand, obviously, so you have room to customize quite a bit according to what you want. For the Orion and Virgo classes, I prefer them to be a lot more even, but Ophiuchus, Phoenix, and Eridanus, I definitely want a bigger gradient. With a pair of scissors and a ruler, or you can eyeball if you like, measure how long you want the wand to be and cut it. Sometimes I cut at both ends, depending on how fine I want the point to end up. Next I'm going to plug the tip with some clay and then fill the tube up with sand. This isn't really necessary, but it does add a little bit of weight to the piece, and you know, so it's not hollow anymore. Some tutorials on the internet use hot glue or resin. I've tried it, and it's really useful if you're using paper for the base, but I think it's too messy and I don't really have the patience for it. You will notice that when a card overlaps on the layer underneath, it's very obvious. It's not so noticeable with paper, but if you think it looks good that way, then yeah, you know, just leave it alone. I don't, so I'm gonna go ahead and mask at least some of that using little bits of clay. Now we're going to work on the handle. The Orion class has this basket weave or faux leather gladiator look to it. Starting with 4 vaguely equal pieces of clay, I roll each one out and flatten them into strips long enough for what I'm doing. Now, starting from where I want the handle to begin, and you can decide where that is for you to fit your hand or whatever, make a spiral going down with a gap in between roughly equal to the strip itself. With the next piece, make a spiral going down in the opposite direction, making sure that the proportions of the spiral are equal but mirrored. You can technically stop here, but I think the gaps look a bit empty, so I keep going. With the third piece, starting on the opposite side of that first piece, I spiral down, filling in the gaps I left behind. With the third piece, starting on the opposite side of the tube as the first piece, I spiral down, filling in the gaps I left between. And with the last strip I go in the opposite way. So now you end up with this kind of effect. It doesn't really look like a basket weave. I guess you could make a basket weave pattern with the clay before you put it on the cylinder, but that kind of involves forward planning and or math, and I can't even deal with that. Right, so the guard and pommel are just 2 thick strips I shaped into rings around the top and the bottom of the handle. If you press in too much, the clay will flatten and the ring will loosen and get wider. I heard it as soon as I said it, just leave it alone. Just a small note, on the standard Orion, the pommel is flat, just like this. Roman's wand here is rounded, like it would be on the Virgo class. And finally, we work the tip. Okay, so 2 small strips spiraling down from the top, and then with a small piece shaping the tip. Sometimes I leave out the spiral. I just think it makes for a cute detail. It is absolutely imperative that you let the clay dry and set before you move on. Painting over it too soon will prevent the water from evaporating. I guess you could figure that out yourself, but I'm just saying. Okay, so now, maybe a day later, it's time to spray paint. Safety first, obviously. Do this in a well-ventilated space, lay out some plastic or protective material, you know the deal. I'm assuming that you know how to spray paint something, so just, yeah, gold. It looks gaudy as fuck right now, I know. Which is why the next step is to add a classy patina to it. Once the gold is completely dry, give it an hour or so, I cover the entire thing with black paint, and then with my fingers just rub enough off to reveal some of the gold paint underneath. You could probably experiment with letting it dry just a little bit, so that when your finger goes past it leaves some of the acrylic, making a grungy look. I like to leave the black in the little crevices and just have the gold showing in the open areas, so that if this were really made of metal, a hand would probably naturally polish it like it was being used. This part is completely random and subject to artistic flair. Half the time I don't even know how I end up with what I do. The final step is to apply clear coat. Now, I don't know if this is true for all of them, but the ones I've been using are actually kind of corrosive, so if you accidentally touch it before it's completely dry, you end up ripping off a chunk of paint, and maybe some of the paper and clay too. It's a bitch to fix up, so be careful to do only one section at a time. Oh, also, it's important to spin the wand around during the first few minutes of drying to make sure that the clear coat doesn't drip down on one side. You would end up with slight varnishing on one side and this gross lump on the other. If that happens though, just reapply the clear coat and it will just corrode itself. So there you have it, the Orion class from your future favorite Wandmakers, Simeon and Moon.